we might want to give a particular function in one class access to private members of another class. So we can define that specific class function as a friend. So let's look at an example. I'm going to define a classroom as a forward function, because our class house is going to be, and we'll need to recognize it. And so class house will have a public variable int area, and it will have a function. We'll define a function calculate area that takes in an object from the classroom. So that's our class house, and then we're going to define classroom with some private members, int length, int width, and I will define a constructor room, takes an int len and int width, and assigns that to our private members. Length equals len, width equals width. Now I want to be able to calculate the area. So house wants to be able to calculate the area from private members of the room class. So I will define this function here, void house, and use this colon signifier to say that I'm calling the calculate area function that belongs to the class house, and it's going to take in the class room, and I'm going to define the object to be room, and it will calculate the area by accessing private members of room. And what you might see right away is that, okay, house takes in the object room and it's going to access private members, but room doesn't know that it should allow access to house yet, because the classroom, nowhere have we made house a friend yet. So what we can do is specifically define this function calculate area as a friend. So friend void house. So house has a function called calculate area, and it'll take in class room and an object argument room. So that way calculate room knows that it should friend the calculate area function of house. So it should only give the calculate area function access to its private members, not the whole house class. So to demonstrate this, let's go ahead and define a room 10 by 7, as well as define the class house for an object home. Home is going to call the calculate area function, pass in the object room that we defined earlier, and then let's print out the area to see that it did what we expected it to do, which is access the private members of room. That worked. Now let's say we wanted to define a global function that was allowed to have access to private members of room. What we can do is define our global function, so int calculate area of room, so it's going to receive the room object, and we want to calculate the area using private members of room, which are room.length and room.width. We're going to return this value. Now in order to get access, or in order for room to allow the room class to allow access to calculate area, we have to make it a friend function as well. So we can go up here, friend int calculate area of room, the room class of an object room. And let's see this in action. I'm going to define int area equals whatever calculate area returns. And I will pass it room. And to see global function area, we can print that. And we can see that our global function got access to area, or rather calculated area by getting access to private members of room by defining it as a friend function within the classroom. So that's how we can define a global function to be a friend of an object. All this functionality is meant to make the coding simpler, easier to read, easier to follow, easier to debug by allowing very specific functions to have access to private members. So that's the philosophy behind friend functions.